The Venus Project, Teamspeak Seminar, July 10, 2011.
Okay, I guess we'll start with a few questions that were left over from last week. When it comes to raising awareness, is it in the interest of the Venus Project for supporters to attend protests and speaking against governments and corporations in a way that is confrontational?
It's always confrontational. Whenever you describe another government, just describe the inefficiency, why it is unworkable, but don't bother attacking people personally. Just say that the system has no proof of its authenticity or workability. Point out to the shortcomings of any system rather than pick on an individual person.
I'm going to clarify this a little bit. He's talking about attending protests and speaking against governments, within the protests. Is that worthwhile?
That was the answer I gave.
Okay, that's good. What stand can and should we present when we encounter situations like Greece, when corporatists and IMF are putting the country's resources, trying to privatize the country's resources? What recourse do we have?
The same answer that I gave for the first question.
We don't really have much control of any of that. We really have to present these ideas to people as quickly as possible so other people have a different direction to work towards. What would happen in regards to space program? Would the vision be to start a Star Trek-like society with starships exploring the universe because we have the technology to get to our nearest star today?
After the world learns to live together, when all the nations join to take care of the environment and one another, that'll be the beginning of the scientific age. I think then at that time we'll probably go off and explore other areas of the universe. But before that, I'm afraid of any single nation going out on the space ventures. I'd rather go out as a collective system.
Do you think it's a good idea to implement other types of languages like Esperanto or LOJBAN language?
None of those languages are based upon the scientific principles that I refer to. When that time comes, we will have to get the approval of nations to work together. Then we can devise a language.
What is the advantage of a three-wheel car over a four-wheel car?
None, unless you give the specifications of the distance between the two wheels. In other words, the wider they are apart, the safer the car. The single wheel would be in the rear of the car. The twin wheels, two wheels, would be at the front end of the car, somewhat wider than a conventional car. Then there would be an advantage. Steering and parking becomes much easier, turning around becomes much easier, and of course, the rear wheel would be the power wheel.
Okay, what do you say simply to people when trying to raise awareness and people refer past cult leaders and try to relate them to Peter or yourself?
I don't answer that question because it doesn't have any inquiry in it. It's just merely a statement that is not factual.
Would it be desirable to organize an international and public convention to show the world the huge and international interest of a new world resource-based economy?
Yes, if you're capable of pointing that out, do it. If you don't have enough information, read more about the Venus Project and its proposals to make sure that you don't put your own projections into it, which may be detrimental.
Yeah, and if people wanted to organize that, it would have to come from other people because we really don't have the time or the funds right now to organize something like that. But we're all for it if people want to do it. The recommended reading list is so long. Could you please name 10 most important books from the reading list? We went through that and we actually ended up with 20 books, but we will shorten it a bit and put it up somewhere on the activist site. Okay, this person is asking if you've ever checked out a certain website that presents scientific evidence of life after death. Also, why do you recommend a book on your reading list by Michael Shermer when he has a vested interest in continuing to deny evidence of paranormal subjects, since he is closed-minded skeptic debunker, just like James Randi?
We would disagree in that area. But anyway, all books are subject to interpretation like language. If you have to write the author and ask him specifically what he meant by verification.
Are you aware that there already is an alternative to animal testing that simulates on computers or synthetic skin that is like human skin, and that since animals' bodies are different, that humans, as far as how they react to chemicals, that it is not logical to use animals for testing anyway, and that most animal testing is done for cosmetics and not for medicines to save people's lives? Do you want to go into that?
I don't have very much to say about that, but if you find out anything that makes sense, that comes from a reliable source, put it out on the internet so others might become aware of it.
In the aims and proposal sections in the Venus Project site under Phase 3, there are 18 aims and goals of the Venus Project. Do they have to be followed in that specific order?
No, they do not. You can pick out any section that you feel capable of addressing.
How can we reach sentimental people? For example, people that are attached to picturesque towns such as San Francisco, or people who like rock music and loud music, such as members of motorbike gangs.
I don't think you can address that in this system. I think that people that like San Francisco, New York, or Paris are victims of culture, and anybody can learn to like anything. And I would say that only through education and the intelligent management of the Earth's resources can we come to a workable system. That's the only way we can arrive at it that I know of. If you know of another way, state it.
I was wondering what your thoughts were on hypnosis. Do you consider it as a science? Do you think it will be taken more seriously than it is now?
I think that the victims of hypnosis are people who want to believe in it. I do not accept it myself, but that would be a personal interpretation. I think that hypnosis, a person has to be conditioned to want to go along with the hypnotist. But I think that hypnosis is not a science as yet.
I hear different discussions about work in the future, from part-time to not at all. Is one true vision of the Venus Project, or does this represent a transition period, i.e. first part-time and then possibly no work in the distant future as technology surpasses the need for any human employment?
I believe that's only during the transition. I believe that the future will ultimately end most forms of labor.
I hear different discussions on housing in the future. I believe Jacques mentions that in the future people can design their houses as they wish. But I was to understand also, per the Venus Project, that in the future there will be no personal ownership of homes or property.
That is true. I don't think anybody really wants to own anything. They want to command its use when they want it. They want to use motor vehicles or sailboats whenever they want to use it. I don't think that you can set aside time for each person to use it. It'll be available when they want to use it.
And about homes, people designing their own homes?
They will not design their own homes. Their profession will be studied, and their major areas of interest will be studied, and the home will provide for the individual interests.
They could design the inside of it however they wish. What do you think of the recent increased UFO sightings all over the world?
Well, I don't think that the people are always capable of interpreting what they see out there. without a particular background. People see balloons and they see other phenomena. There's many different types of unusual phenomena that occurs in deep space and in the atmosphere. The book is called Unusual Phenomena, if you want to get a picture of many different natural occurrences that are interpreted as flying saucers.
Do you own a TV, DVD player, VCR, or audio cassette player? Do you only watch documentaries? And do you follow news from any sources?
I follow news from many different sources, extreme liberal and extreme right.
And in between, yeah. We do have TV, DVD players, VCRs, or audio cassette players. We usually are using all that for our work, for making DVDs and other recordings. Oh, do you only watch documentaries?
No, we watch the entire spectrum.
Not entirely. Sports and everything. Actually, it is mostly documentaries. What do you think of the FBI recently releasing all of its UFO files saying that aliens exist?
I can't answer that. I don't believe that aliens exist. I don't accept that concept. However, that's up to your interpretation.
I always like the thing you said when people say, is there intelligent life out there? Do you think that there's intelligent life? And I've heard Jack say, yes, I believe there's intelligent life because they've never come here. Okay, also, are you aware of a recent article that said that Carl Sagan actually did believe in aliens and only publicly denied so he would not lose funding?
What I read about Carl Sagan is there's so many possible planets out there that could support life. The probability of life existing on other worlds is very high, but he doesn't use the term aliens. He says there's very high probability of life because there's so many different types of planets that can support life.
It's all very well having nice models and pictures and books, but that's not going to solve our problems. What do you suggest we do?
Well, I suggest the person that asked that question ask, why do we build models? Not models don't represent. He doesn't know what he's talking about, or she doesn't know what she's talking about. Because models are one way of testing different systems.
And also the models and the pictures and the books offer a way out of our problems. It has to be introduced in some way. The models and the pictures back up what can be done, and it demonstrates this. It's not like we're not working towards doing something else. That's all the precursor to what we want to do. It would be better to, instead of saying it's not enough to solve our problems, work with us to work towards the next step, and that's what we're all trying to do more films, to do a first city, anything else that we can do that's stated in our aims and directions.
I just want to say this. The average person that can read, if he picks up a book on electronics and reads the book and pronounces every word correctly and knows nothing about electronics, they can't get anything out of the book. Not everybody can pick up a book and read it and get the significance of the book. It depends on your background, how much experience you have in the area you're reading. So when we read a book, we do not always understand it as the author intended it, due to the fact that language is subject to interpretation. So I would say that if you're very well schooled in the physical sciences, you have a different way of reading a book and a different way of interpreting the book. Even if you write a scientific article, different people interpret it in ways relevant to their background.
How does one decide right from wrong or preferable from non-preferable?
Right from wrong is very early language, and it is not explicit. We don't deal with right or wrong. We deal with does it work, how well does it work, and what modification does it need to make it work. No such thing as right or wrong. It's the workability of the system that we are concerned with.
I have a question. How can we get, within our meetings that we do among ourselves, how can we get everybody to be feeling more comfortable with questioning everything that we know and having a more scientific approach to understanding what we're talking about?
I would suggest that you get the book called The Best That Money Can't Buy and read each chapter at a session and discuss it and answer questions, and then read the next chapter so you all come to common agreements and understand the intent of the book and the nature of the questions that you ask. The book covers most aspects of the future and most aspects of the Venus Project. So if you read chapter by chapter at each meeting, discuss it so that it's a common agreement, then move on to the next chapter.
Thank you.
Benjamin from London. At the moment, I'm working with Venus Expression Media, and I've got a project to work on making some animation about the FAQs on the Venus project.
Yes, we thought that was a good idea.
Thanks. Well, my question was, I had a look at your FAQ page, and basically, I found some topics that I wanted to talk about, and I've got all the answers for that. One, I was thinking that I don't know if it's actually you find that something that comes back a lot, but I find that some people do actually think the Venus Project to be like a sect or a religion, and I know it's not true at all. But I just thought maybe, do you think that's something we should address as well?
Yes, I did when I said all language is subject to interpretation. If that's their interpretation, they are very simple people indeed. And the only way you can address that is to get them a dictionary that describes the difference between science and speculation.
I think we could expand on that in a question for one of the animations, though. I think that's a good idea. We could write that up.
Okay, well, that's all I wanted to know, so we'll suppose we can just talk about it later.
Okay.
I got one question. Would you support a start of the Venus project on a smaller scale than the whole city? For example, if there are people which would say something like, okay, let's start it in a smaller community?
Only if it's an open system that's open to anyone that wants to come in and learn. If it's a closed system, it won't work.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question. What would be the best method to initiate change, or I guess understanding and reasoning when talking to lawmakers and politicians and people these days to try to make this a reality? I mean, obviously they're part of the system, you know, they're the ones who are kind of in charge. So, I mean, what would be the best way? Do we focus on them or the younger people who could potentially be our future politicians, get them instilled with the idea so down the line this can definitely be a reality? I mean, I'm shooting for sooner than later, but just a thought and just a question.
All right, I'm going to try to answer that. First of all, if you talk electronics to the average person, they will not understand you because they don't even have the basics for it. Before you talk to people, you have to find out what their profession is, what they know, and if they don't know enough about the subject you're talking about, you have to educate them into that direction. You have to prepare people to understand the various concepts that you bring up. The assumption that people will always understand you if you talk to them is a false assumption. People only understand what they're capable of understanding. If they don't understand it, you have to give them the ABCs of your information. The way you learned it, you have to give them the basic instruction as to what a concept is, how we choose one concept over another. If they don't have those basics, they cannot understand you.
Thanks.
You can't do that. You have to question what a person knows. And if they don't know certain things, you have to educate them in those things before you can even talk to them.
So again, what would be the best way to educate them?
By you knowing your subject and presenting to them your concepts in a language they can understand. And you have to fish for that. When you talk to them and you begin to advocate a new direction, ask them if they understand that direction or understand what you said. If they said no, elaborate until they do.
Thanks.
I got another point to the last question. How can we avoid extremely ego reactions if people are into too much new content?
If there's ego reaction, you ask if they want to learn about the new system or do they want to win the argument.
Good one, thank you.
When Darwin came up with his theory of evolution, the questions that will remain is, what proof do you have that that might be so? And Darwin would go into explaining in the layers of the earth, as you dig back into the past, you can find different structures of different animals, that all life changes. The plants of 5,000 years ago or 100,000 years ago were different than the plants today, that nothing remains the same. The dinosaurs that existed then do not exist now, but we have evidence of their existence. That's all you can point out, the evidence that you have to prove that what you're saying has some basis in fact.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, what are the fundamental aims of education?
Education must correlate with the nature of the physical world, to study the environment, water, trees, our relationship to nature, and our relationship to one another. Not the opinions of people, but the findings of scientific inquiry, and to make those things, that information available to all people. Without knowledge of the earth, you cannot know how we relate to things. So I would say that you have to educate people or inform them into areas that they have little information in.
Will you have some form of security or policing, as I believe people's natural tendencies tend toward dark impulses, and it will cause major social issues. Even the most educated people are not immune to it.
You're not talking about anything real. You're talking about your own opinions. Your own opinions are not correct in that instant. Environment shapes behavior. If you want appropriate behavior, you have to shape it by modifying the environment. If you want a man to be a doctor, he has to go to medical school. He has to be exposed to the environment that teaches him medicine. If you want him to be an aeronautical engineer, you put him in an aeronautical engineering environment. You cannot do it any other way. You have to educate people in the field they wish to pursue.
Okay, I think we went over this. What would be the best method to initiate change, understanding, and reasoning when talking to politicians, or should we focus on the younger people who will be our future politicians? Yeah, okay, knowing they will advocate a program that will make them obsolete. Okay, knowing they will.
I don't understand your question.
Well, I think you went over some of this already. You think we should focus on the younger people who will be the future
No, you
politicians?
focus on anybody receptive to your presentation.
Do you think we need to focus on politicians to make this work?
Not at all.
Okay, would you support a community which would start the Venus Project like living in a smaller scale than the whole city? We're going over some of these already.
I don't know how to do that. The best you can do is inform people as to the advantages of the global society. And if you can succeed in presenting the advantages, they will agree with you. If you fail, you have to come at it another way so that they do understand what you're saying.
I don't know if you've got that, but we would do a community, a smaller community. It doesn't have to be a large one. Even if we were able to do a research center which is larger, where more people could come and work in one place, would be useful. But we would have to have funding for that as well. What should I tell someone who is telling me that the Venus Project is planned economy and that planned economy is leading to distribution problems?
You have a lot to learn about the Venus Project. Study the Venus Project first. Read all you can and get all the information you can about it. Then ask your questions. The question is, how do you manage your distribution? Is that what you want to know? The way you manage your distribution is you have to have a population, you have to have production facilities, and if you do a survey of what exists, what material resources exist, what factories, transportation, the amount of people that require certain things, you have to do a survey first. Then you design the adequate production system. You cannot do it without a knowledge of what exists.
Today, we have something that's not a planned economy, and it's total chaos. Most of the population does not have goods and services, so I don't really know what this person is talking about. If you look at today's economy, the chaos that we have, because it isn't planned in order for everybody to acquire goods and services, it just doesn't make any sense, this question. If the new system is in place and people are creating new ideas, technologies, etc., what if 1,000 people all create something quite similar, all having different approaches and different merits to the same idea?
That does not occur. That only occurs in the head of the person asking the question. In the real world, the best way to picture that is an ocean liner with 1,000 passengers or 5,000 passengers. If you have 5,000 passengers, the purser in the ocean liner has to know what to order, how much food, how much water, but all that's based on the passengers in the ocean liner. No one can estimate anything unless you have information. So an ocean liner carries as much water and as much food as it needs for the passengers, for the amount of passengers the ship is carrying. The system that produces the most with the least expenditure of energy is the system selected. They will use energy determinants to determine the efficiency of the suggestion. If thousands of people suggest ideas, the ideas are boiled down to how much energy does it take to fulfill that need. And so we have to work between the systems. How much resources do we have, and how essential is that need?
Do you ever think about open student contests on universities?
Well, they're not really contests. They work on problems. Students are given problems. They're assigned, how do you reduce conflict? How do you increase the agricultural yield without exhausting the soil? It's not a contest. It's a challenge that's put before students, and the unanswered questions are dealt with by posing to the students transportation problems, growing problems, delivery, movement of goods to distribution centers. All those problems are put before the planning group, and the planning group comes up with answers. The way we select the appropriate answer is by the energy it takes to conform to that question.
This person is asking if you've ever thought of a student contest and posed these.
We have no contest and no competition.
No, it's talking about today for university students or design students, that it might be an interesting approach to have them think about things in different ways.
Yes, we do have that in our book. It says if you found a new planet like the Earth with the productive capacity of the Earth and all the resources, how would you lay it out?
Yes, that's a challenge that Jacques has in a couple of the books that he writes. Actually, that's where Peter got that statement from in his film, the idea to go that way in the film. But our book is presented in universities too, but we don't have it as a contest to a particular university or anything. If that's something somebody wants to initiate, that might be a good idea. And do you think it'd be good to start a comic series for explaining the Venus Project right now, as it would require negligible funds and could be done largely by volunteers itself? If so, I think it would be better to make a video appeal for volunteers for the project like the one for donations.
Any system that works can be used. You can put it out there, see if it works. If you get inquiries, more people are interested, and say, boy, that comic series really made things very clear to me, then use it. If it doesn't, give it up, or come at it another way.
Do you think it's possible to make the Venus Project a possibility without using fiat currency? At this time, I don't know of one.
That's right. Only during the transition will you have all the problems. Once the Venus Project is installed and the new education system is in, and if we can get the nations of the world to join together, then we can work those problems out. But the transition will be painful and troublesome.
Yeah, and at this time, funding is needed. Otherwise, it becomes a hand-tooled community. This is not what we're looking for. Okay, and then they're asking, if not, what's the best target market to go after to raise the funds to start the implementation phase? Well, if anybody wants to work with us on that, join the media group, because we're targeting different people who might be able to help with funding or any other ways. So look into that with Craig on the media group. How do you prioritize your time?
By what is essential. In other words, the priorities depend on what the conditions are. In other words, if there's a rain of meteors and it destroys the agricultural area, then what other ways do we have of producing food? You have to build an inventory of different approaches to problems and fictitiously ask the question, what if this happens? Then what do you do? What if a tsunami occurs quite frequently? What do you do? What's the best approach? So you get many submissions and you use that approach which is most appropriate at the time.
I think the same person's asking, how do you choose, for example, to focus your energy on a major motion picture?
If our aim is to convince people of the advantages of the Venus Project, a motion picture will disqualify their use of their own projections. They will then get to see what the Venus Project proposes, not what they think the Venus Project proposes.
Yeah, we think it's very important to use the motion picture, or if we end up with a TV series or whatever, that we use it to get to the majority of people, the general public, so they have a better understanding of this. But all sorts of movies and games and everything else has to be made to get to people in any way that we can. And how did you arrive at the decision to start the research center?
If you wish to build housing for most people, you have to do research in building materials and methods. If you wish to build a transportation system, you have to do research on transportation. So we always have the first city as a research center to see what exists, what we can select from in order to arrive at a decision. We don't make decisions in the Venus Project. We arrive at them by putting things to test and trying them out. If they don't work, we change them. Nothing is rigid in the Venus Project. We have no fixed concepts of anything. We just have different approaches to problems and we check them out. Those which work, we put to use. If they don't work, we modify them.
And here at the Research Center, we have many buildings, but we experimented with building processes. That's why we did a lot of the buildings. And we used them, all of the buildings, their work areas, their video buildings, their offices, their shops. And we just needed a place to do all that work. So we built it.
We never built what we wanted to build. We built what we can afford. I would have designed one building that contains everything we need. The reason we put up separate buildings is because we didn't have the money to go ahead and build one unit to take care of the major problems.
What can the Venus Project volunteers do now to improve their lives and others before the transition to a resource-based economy?
You can inform them as to the advantages of the Venus Project, what the Venus Project will do to improve their own well-being and their own lives. You have to convince them that the Venus Project can offer much more than the present-day monetary-based society. I think that the wealthiest people today will live better under the Venus Project than in the free enterprise system.
How do you introduce people to cybernetics? Many are afraid of the picture of being a part of one big mechanism. Is there a way to handle this fear?
By giving them your knowledge. If you don't have that fear, tell them why you don't have that fear, because you know more about it than they do. So you have to inform them that robotics is not a threat, except in the monetary system. It's a threat. You lose your job if a machine can do your work. But in the Venus Project, when new machines come in, we shorten the workday and we increase your vacation time so you can spend more time with your family. Do you understand that? It's of no advantage to do that in a system designed for profit. In a system designed for profit, it is more efficient to downsize, get rid of the people that the machines have replaced. And when you do that, you hurt people. But you don't give a damn about people, you give a damn about profits. So the profit system threatens our decency and ethics.
Sometimes you can bring it down to the home level for people, and when people say they don't want to live in a mechanized society or they don't want too much technology, you can say, I'm coming tomorrow to pick up your refrigerator, your stove, your dishwasher, your telephones, your televisions, your electric toothbrush.
We depend on technology today. Everything that you have that enables us to become civilized gives you more time rather than take your clothing down to the river and washing it. Returning to the past is a real stupid concept because you spend all day growing food and killing insects on the plants. You can't have time to think up new ideas and solve problems. It's the machine technology that can give us more time to be with our children, to spend with our family, to read, to become better informed. Without machines, we would be occupied all day long just taking care of the necessities of life.
Can you tell me a bit more about the memory metal and how it can be used on such a macro level?
Well, with the advent of nanotechnology, we'll be able to make metals and non-metal materials give it a memory. And in the production methods of the future, we will produce chairs, contour chairs, and then flatten them out and ship thousands of chairs to other areas of the globe. And then when we get to that area, we can use heat, and that heat will cause the chairs to come back into a compound form. But shipping things already shaped and formed occupies too much space. So I would say that nanotechnology and shape memory alloys can be flattened out. For example, if we made a dome and flattened it out into a disk and shipped 10,000 disks to India for housing, then when it gets there, we use about a minute and a half to heat that area and it becomes a dome again. That's how memory materials can be used in the future. Conserving space, making more products available, carrying a greater load on the ship to another country. So many different uses for it, medicine, many other fields that we don't have the time to go into now.
They're even using it for heart surgery where it keeps the vessels open. When they put it into the vessels, it opens it up with the heat of the body. Obviously, with the ingrained fear from films like Terminator, do you think it'll be a hindrance in the ultimate goal to leave decisions up to computers and all manufacturing up to robots?
The decisions are not up to computers. They're based on what the computer senses in the environment. If it senses a noxious or poisonous gas, an alarm goes off and awakens you. So these machines do not make decisions. They sense threats in the environment. In other words, if there's a traffic accident in the highway all the machine will do is tell you that that highway is not accessible, that you take route number 5. That will get you to your destination. It is not the machines making decisions. It's machines responding to problems in the environment.
And yes, films like The Terminator are a tremendous hindrance to this direction. It just closes people in terms of technology being organized for the benefit of people. Those films are really promoting a monetary system, value system of how they use technology today. Did you want to say something, Jacques? What were you saying?
I want to repeat myself. If you really want to know and ask questions, become familiar with the Venus Project and ask questions that are based upon the Venus Project's proposals, not your own projections of what you think they are.
Maybe we don't have as many questions because we're reading the book, Jacques and Roxanne, and so it's answering a lot of our questions already, and so we haven't gotten to a level where we can ask questions on top of that yet. I feel like I'm still pretty stupid. I don't know what else to ask. You know, anything I think about is easy to understand through the ideas of the Venus Project.
Well, the Venus Project has worked on most aspects of a future society based upon what we know today. And so all we can do is apply what we know today. But if people have speculative ideas, they have to be put to test. That's what the Venus Project will do. Test out the ideas. If they work, we'll use them. If they don't work, I won't say that they don't work. There's some aspects of it that may not work that have to be modified. But if you don't know anything about how the Venus Project manages education, what subjects will be taught in the future, what professions will be manifest in the future, and you project your own values, and you're just taking up a lot of time. But if you ask questions relative to the Venus Project's proposals, that would help people, rather than you inventing some problem and thinking, how would you handle if a guy fell in love with 3 different women at the same time? You're projecting your own values into the Venus Project. You have to ask, what will happen to jealousy, and how do you eliminate jealousy? How do you eliminate conflict between people? These are real questions. How do you do that? How do you accomplish it? Not saying, well, there'll be conflict in the future. There's always been conflict. There'll always be wars. There's always been disagreements among nations. You're not talking about the Venus Project. You're talking about your own projections.
The Venus Project proposes that information is available, unrestricted, and accessible to all. This could radically change the world with the release of classified information by governments and corporations around the world. What do you think about this?
Well, governments and corporations around the world are not going to talk about systems that would eradicate their own performance. In other words, we have no government. We have no politicians. Politicians were good 100 years ago, but they don't know how to solve problems. But please don't take my word for that. Just ask politicians, how can you prevent war? How can you bring the nations of the world together? They usually don't know the answer to that. Therefore, they cannot solve those problems. The assumption that talking to politicians will help. If you talk to a Seminole Indian about your laptop computer, they won't know what the hell you're talking about. Neither will politicians know what you're talking about, unless they're well educated in the theory of social design, and they're not. The assumption that you can talk to people is an assumption, just that. Without knowledge, you can't talk to people. You can't talk to an Eskimo about transportation systems that don't include horse-drawn sled. The Eskimo thinks of transportation as a bunch of dogs pulling a sleigh along the ice. He can't think of anything else. You make the assumption that a politician will understand what you're talking about. Not necessarily.
And when they don't, what you have to do is give them the information, put it in their heads, and sometimes it takes a longer time to do that. You give them something to think with, start putting things together in different ways.
Yeah, if they don't have the groundwork, they can't even put it together. So the assumption that you can talk to politicians or statesmen is just an assumption. You can't talk to anybody about electronics unless they understand something on it. You can't talk to anybody about the principles of flight unless they understand what ailerons and elevators and rudders are for and how they work. So you have to inform people how airplanes work before you can discuss anything with them. The same with the Venus Project. You can't discuss the Venus Project with a person who says, well, I don't think it'll work if they know nothing about it.
Hey, Jacques, I have a question from Chris. Is that right if I ask you?
Sure.
All right, he wants to know, what is your opinion on the value system that would kill the successor of the Hubble telescope and have no real space program for at least several years, yet will pump billions into competition for non-renewable resources?
Well, I think that most of the institutions in our present-day social system are really afforded, or they're supported by the government because they're really no threat to the system. But I would say that in the future, all of those things would be changed. The whole basis of social operation today is a profit system. And as long as you have a profit system, all your universities are tuned to the monetary system. The universities are not tuned to human betterment. They are not tuned to the well-being of society. The universities are supported by the food industry, by wealthy corporations, and if you threaten them at the university level, that support will be withdrawn. You will not be permitted to talk against the mass productive systems of the present-day economy. If you speak against those systems at a university, they would lose their support.
What about denying the space program projects too today?
The space program, we would not venture into space until the world learned to live together in peace. We're not civilized yet. If you let nations go into space separately, I can assure you that there will be nuclear weapons out in space sooner or later. We're not wise enough yet to use our intelligence to the benefit of humanity and protection of the environment. That should be obvious to you.
And today, the space programs, the amount of money they put into the space program, saying that they get some benefits in return, when there's so many problems here on Earth that demand money to get anything done, it just seems the priorities aren't correct there. They say that we do get benefits from it, but if you took all that money and directed it towards the idea of getting benefits on Earth, you'd get a lot more benefits.
Instead of attempting to point out the shortcomings of the Venus Project, why don't you put those things to question? Why don't you say, how would you handle psychopaths? What would you do if more people develop cancer? How would you treat it? What type of research would you do for heart disease? And how would the direction of the research be determined? Who determines what direction the future is to take? Does Fresco determine that? Does a board of directors determine that? You ought to ask questions about how does the Venus Project arrive at its directives. That's what you want to know. Who makes the decisions? What if a person doesn't want to live in the Venus Project? Can they live their own lifestyle? Yes, they can. They don't have to live under the Venus Project. If there's a religious group that wants to build its own community and wants nothing to do with the Venus Project, say the Amish people, they are free to live any lifestyle they want to. But we think eventually their people will motivate them toward joining with the Venus Project, because the Venus Project does everything that religion talks about. It builds a brotherhood of man. It doesn't kill. There's no wars. Don't forget, the Bible says, do unto others you have others do unto you. It says, thou shalt not kill. The Venus Project is all about that. Whereas the verbal systems of religion talk about and around the subject, but they don't tell us how to do it or how to get from here to there. They really don't know how. It isn't that they don't want to. They don't know how. When you want to put a man on the moon, you bring scientists together. If you want to make an atom bomb, you call upon science. Any problem that threatens the existence of the Earth, we call upon science. We never call upon politicians because they can't solve any problems. They don't know how. They don't have that type of training.
Okay, we'll call it a day then and set this up for next week. Thanks everyone for coming.
Yes, thank everybody for the opportunity to attempt to answer those questions. I really would like to answer questions, but I think the more you know about the Venus Project, the better the questions will be.
Okay, thanks everyone.